So I'm just sitting in my car here, and I figured, I'd give some of my thoughts on the Ukraine situation as it stands today. Um, and I know it's a topic that really has been done to death, and I think most of the public really is kind of a little bit disinterested in it at this point. But I'll tell you, my thinking on it has evolved a little bit recently. And I guess you could say ever since it began, my thinking had been continuously evolving. You might ask me one day, and I might say something, and the next day I might say something a little bit different. Because I think it's a situation with so many variables, and it's not as black and white a situation as it's obviously portrayed. Now, obviously, most of the public's not going to have the greatest understanding of global situations, and they're more inclined to see things in a somewhat black and white view. So it doesn't surprise me that you have a lot of houses with like Ukraine flags up. Even in in one section of my city, there's actually a Ukraine flag on someone's house that has the Ukrainian borders extending well into Russia. I guess like the whole, I guess it's called the Kuban region or something. That's sort of, I guess, Black Sea like peninsula, like that whole region up to basically the Don or the Volga rivers, um, is part of Ukraine. So when the invasion initially started, I had somewhat of mixed feelings. On one hand, yeah, Russia was invading a country. I wouldn't want all of a sudden bombs to start dropping in my town, and I wouldn't be concerned what the greater political situation is there. At the end of the day, I would view that as someone attacking me, attacking my people, attacking my country, family, friends, etc. So in no way was I critical of the Ukrainians defending themselves. Now, it kind of seemed to me that Zelensky, he was willing to let his own people go down as cannon fodder to protect his power. That's kind of my thinking, right? Uh, and initially, the cause or the purpose of the invasion was a several-fold. They wanted a de-armament of Ukraine, right? They wanted it not to join NATO as a neutrality, and they wanted its denazification. And the funny thing is, I don't even know why I even use quotes there, because there's actually some degree of truth to that. The media says that there isn't, but you can go on your own and research Azov Battalion and other ones and see the type of imagery they use. And now, of course, they're moving away from it because of the bad publicity. But make no mistake, like in the 2014 revolution, that's what created modern Ukraine. That's what created the modern Ukrainian government. Ukraine pre 2014 was almost Belarus light. They were well within the economic sphere of Russia. The revolution brought them out of that sphere. Now, I had thought from the beginning that the whole purpose of the war was to bring Ukraine back into the Russian sphere. I had thought they were going for a regime change war in Ukraine. I had thought someone like a Viktor Yanukovych, the pre-revolution president, was going to be put back into power, and then they were going to have elections, and they were going to be probably rigged in favor of the Russian candidate, pro-Russian candidate for the foreseeable future. But I thought Ukraine was going to be able to maintain its independence. That was what I had expected. That was what that was what was indicated from the very beginning. As the war went on, their strategies, that of the Russians, evolved. They evolved from actually being fairly careful to minimize civilian casualties in the early days of the war. Mind you, there's only so much you can do with the nature of the cities over there. You can't really, at least not with like a regular cannon, like a howitzer or mortars or anything. I guess you can, with a mortar, kind of hit over the buildings, but they have block after block of these tall, narrow apartment blocks. Unlike an American city, which is mostly low-rise and high-rise in a certain central district. They're mostly mid to high-rise all throughout the city. So really, in order to hit anything, you need to shoot through several blocks of apartments. And that's just kind of the architectural, geographic nature of the situation on the ground. So obviously, I wasn't going to say that they're genocidal murderers, as some people had been saying, because they were shooting through some apartments. Because there's not really any way to shoot through the other side of the city without doing that. But as the war went on, and as the war progressed, them caring at all about any, even giving off the impression that they're trying to kill as few civilians as possible, even that's out the window. The Russians are completely, at this point, not even concerned about looking like they're trying to be humanitarian in any sort of way. Mass rape on a near World War II level scale by the Russians has been ongoing. It's not how a modern army behaves. It's not how no civilized country tolerates that sort of conduct from its soldiers. Even within the ranks of the Russian army and within the ranks of Russian society. And this is something I discovered after the war had started, something I did research in and made my opinion change quite a bit. Even in their ranks, their form of hazing is anal rape. If you're a guy and you enlist in the army, you will be violated in a way you don't want to be. It's been claimed online that by Russian firefighters, even, that to get a job as a firefighter, you have to go through sexual assault by your other male superiors. The army gets it the worst though, but all sorts of parts of society, the firefighters, police, you name it. But it's mainly in the army, and there's actually a name for this sort of system or unofficial system. It's called I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but Dovchina or Dodovchina. I'll put the name and the link to its Wikipedia page in the description. But ultimately, this is commonplace in the modern Russian Federation. We're not talking about the Soviet Union 1945, which, while they were occupying Germany, which obviously, as we all know, were far from any saints in that war, to say the very, very least. Rape on a massive, massive scale through occupied Germany was an everyday occurrence. Even my aunt, who grew up in Austria, was actually sexually assaulted by the Soviet military while they were in their occupation there. My great aunt. And this, unfortunately, is carried through in the same sort of level, at the same sort of rates in Ukraine. Even in the cities such as Belgorod, which are over the border in Russia, where they're staging soldiers from, you have phone calls released where you have the soldiers talking to their girlfriends, hey, don't go out at night, like, soldiers are there, like, I'm worried about you. The Russian military is even a menace to the Russians where they're stationed within their country. You have an entire army of males who have been sexually assaulted and likely are carrying trauma from that. Possibly even sexually assaulted by objects such as a broom or a bottle. There's videos of it online. Look into it at your own risk. The reality is that you have an army of sexually traumatized men who are going around the country of Ukraine, sexually assaulting each other, sexually assaulting the locals, and they've given up on any semblance of any sort of effort to avoid killing civilians. They're even like it's World War II. They even do straight civilian targets apparently. In Nikolaev or Mykolaiv, however you pronounce it, about not even a week back, nothing really was going on that day war-wise. All of a sudden, rocket comes out of nowhere, boom, smack into an apartment block. All the people were in it. So, for two main reasons. One, because of the deterioration of their methods. And two, because of the apparent change in their objectives. I'm no longer the type of guy who's trying to see both sides of this conflict. I think now, if they weren't from the very beginning, the Russians are pretty indisputably in the wrong in this conflict. That becomes more apparently obvious by the day. The intention is no longer a regime change war. It's a total occupation and annexation of as much as they possibly feasibly can of Ukraine. I think that militarily they realize probably a complete annexation of the entire state of Ukraine is probably a little bit more than they can chew off. So they're planning on just annexing as much as they could possibly occupy before an inevitable peace conference. So, ultimately, I don't think there's really any moral equivalency between the two sides. I don't really think there ever truly was. Even though there are Nazis on the side of Ukraine, people who hold these very, very extremist ideologies. Russia, though, in their country, these ideologies are banned, which, say what you want about that, I personally believe in a strict interpretation of the First Amendment, and I would like to see every other country in the world adopt that as well. But Russia, despite their heavy stance on that sort of thing, employs the Wagner Group to fight with them, which is also a Nazi army as well as Azov. So, in some of these battles, you have Nazis versus Nazis, and you have average Ukrainians as average Russians, So, yeah, no, I mean, I'm serious. At this point, the Russians are deploying just about as many Nazis, people who adhere to that sort of ideology, as the Ukrainians are. So, that's all I can really say about it right now. Just that, I'm not taking a neutral stance anymore. I'm done with that. The Russians managed to score some points with me, in years past. I thought that, I like their idea of a Trans-Siberian wheat belt. I like the whole goal they had of Russia feeding the world, I like that they brought back, Orthodox Christianity. I like that Putin had been on a church building spree for years, And I was saying shit, When actually in Russia's history have they been as liberal as they, are now, as in speaking from several years back. But I think you've seen since then, they're getting a lot more authoritarian. What people can say in Russia has gone down. And it's beyond just a normal wartime, system. Starting to pick some of the wrong friends. North Korea and Russia are growing a much closer relationship. You see them in some ways drawing closer with communist China. And in other ways, I wouldn't call them allies. more of a situation where communist China would like Russia as a junior partner. But they are, I guess you could say, somewhat of not reluctant allies, but they are allies who are suspicious of one another, allies who at some point intend to stab each other in the back. They're circumstantial allies. That's the word I'm looking for. They are circumstantial allies. Allies of circumstance. But ultimately, Russia's been justifying their war, or at least their second phase of the war, for the liberation, right, of the Russian-speaking people. Which, this idea that just because people speak Russia, they need to be subject to Moscow is an interesting thing. Especially when you consider that actually Kiev was the first Russian capital. So I don't really see anything inappropriate about Russian speakers being subject to Kiev as opposed to Moscow from a historical perspective, right? So they're using this sort of like, oppressed members of our ethnicity excuse. Putin saying stuff like, well, I'm not just responsible for my own, just the people, Russians in Russia. I'm responsible for all Russians around the world. It sounds like an ethno-nationalist ploy. But Russia on the inside is not an ethno-nationalist country in the slightest bit. In fact, Putin's political party is called United Russia, and the premise behind this United Russia is that it's a union of all the ethnicities of Russia, not just the Russians, not just the Rus, but Chechens, Tartars, Buryats, Yakuts, Kalmyks, Circassians, Karelians, Nenets, Komi, I don't know if that's an ethnicity, but Samoyedic people, Shovetians, you name it. That all these people, they call Russia their home, right? And that even in actually the republics, and again, I'm not saying there's necessarily anything wrong with this, but this last part, though, I'm not sure I agree with, because everyone in the republics, regardless of their ethnicity, even if they're in an area of that republic that has 90+% Russians, are required to learn the language of that area. But I'm not so sure that's a bad thing anyway. If they weren't otherwise learning a second language in school, I don't know if they are or not. I suppose it's not a bad thing. So, but the point is that Russia on the inside is not an ethno-nationalist country at all. They're very much into the whole diversity spiel. They're very, very, very much a multiculturalist country, politically speaking. And that's something that's nominally the case. That's in the platform of Putin's party, in the United Russia platform. So that's a core held belief of sort of the current Russian regime. So I think what that shows is that it's not really a genuine ploy, right? If they're concerned about retaining the Russianness of those areas would be, in some ways, would be better off kept Ukrainian. If you're concerned about the survival of the Russian language and Russian society. Because the reality of the matter is, Russia has actually the largest illegal immigration problem in the world. There's millions of people in Russia from Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, you name it, in there, and many of them are in Moscow. They have the biggest mosque in Europe is in Moscow. When the call to prayer happens in Moscow, certain streets are lined. Again, I'm not trying to say this is a bad thing or a good thing. That's not what I'm trying to get at here. We can have a discussion about multiculturalism and diversity. But what I'm saying is that their idea that their front they're giving to the world, that they're an ethno-nationalist country, or the front that they're giving to the people in Donetsk, Luhansk, and and signals they're sending far off to the folks in Transnistria, in the Narva area of Estonia, the heavily Russian part, heavily Russian parts of Latvia. The message they're sending them is that we are the ethno-nationalist, Russia. It is the homeland of the Russians, the Russian people, the Russians this, the Russians that. But actually inside Russia, it's not like that. It's not like that. It's multiculturalism. Russians aren't, favored at all in Russia. Again, I'm not saying they should be. I'm an egalitarian guy. I'm not even trying to I'm just objectively speaking, they're not an ethno-nationalist nation. They're multicultural, and that makes their claims to those people complete BS. If you're in Donetsk, if you're in Luhansk, and you're buying this stuff that you're liberators, and glory of the Russian people and this and that, you're an idiot. You're being taken for a fool.